I'm so excited to have you all here today. Like Ari and I were just saying, this is any interaction that we can get with people we're so excited about, especially people who, like us, care about sustainability and want to geek out on zero waste and all the things we can do to save our planet. So let's go ahead and jump into our agenda. We're just going to get right into it. Okay, so, well, let me, sort out my screen super quickly, and then things will go more smoothly. Wow, come on. Okay, there we go. Okay, so thank you so much for tuning into our webinar on circular waste, or circular economy, not circular waste. My name is Rosie Briggs, and I'm the Eco Leaders Manager at EcoCycle. I promise my brain will turn on in just a second. So EcoCycle, for those of you who don't know, is Boulder County's local recycler, but we are also a nonprofit that has been in operation since 1976, dedicated to creating zero waste communities. So doing everything we can to create zero waste in every sector of the community. Tonight, we're going to go beyond the bin, talking about what circular economy looks like and how we can move toward that. We will start with illustrating what circular economy is, just defining it and laying it out for you. Then we'll dive into how we can go about creating a circular economy. We'll talk about technical systems and natural or biological systems. I will explain all of this in more detail as we go through, but I'm just laying it out right now. In technical systems, we'll talk about the three main stages here. So upstream, which is before production of a product, after production, and before disposal, where we'll focus on keeping resources in circulation. And then downstream, which is after consumption, where we'll talk about how to get those resources back into the system. So within each of those three stages, we'll talk about the toolbox we have at our disposal and how we can use each of those tools to create circularity within each of those stages. We'll have two wonderful guest speakers. You can see their little squares up here. So Wayne, who will talk to us about repair right in the middle, and then Leandra from Backyard Farm, who will talk to us about closing the loop on the organic system at the end. So that's where they will come in, and we're really lucky to have them here tonight. We will be talking for about 90 minutes in total. I promise it's all good stuff. It will all be interesting, in my opinion anyway. And then at the end, we should have about 30 minutes for questions. So as I said at the very beginning, when somebody asked this is a webinar style Zoom. So that means that we, the panelists, are the only ones who have video and mic access, but you all can put things in the chat box and especially in the Q&A box for your questions. But please do keep in mind that we will have a whole chunk of time dedicated to questions. And if you start asking your questions at the beginning, there is a high likelihood that the answer will be coming up in the presentation. So maybe hold off until we get through all of our content, and then, but if you don't want to forget your question, then do what you have to do. Let's see, I will also just give a little reminder that we, like all of you, are adjusting and adapting to this whole situation. So we're at home. Ari is in the office, so she is our moderator here, and she's clicking through, so she wanted really good Wi-Fi access. So thank you to Ari for going into the office. So these trainings are usually done in person, and while we have gotten pretty good at this whole Zoom thing, please be patient if we have any technical difficulties. And with that, let me try to, there we go, okay. With that, I think I'm so excited that we have the opportunity to give webinars instead of just in-person trainings, because so many more of you can join, and from all over the place, so we can interact with people that can't necessarily join us in person, which is awesome, and it has been awesome so far since March. So with that, I think let's get going. So the first thing that we're going to talk about in this circular economy webinar is what circular economy is not. So circular economy is not linear, which is the model that we have right now. So the linear model is our current model. So in the current linear model, we take resources, we make products and dispose of those products, wasting them effectively. Then we repeat it with new resources and new products, usually burying the old resources in a landfill for them never to be used again. So that's what we have going on right now. That is what we're not going for. So starting with the take step, this is something that we covered in our Earth Day webinar in April, if you joined us for that one. the upstream impact of our stuff. If you didn't get to tune in, I can also send out the recording of that one in our follow-up email. So in that webinar, I talked about each material and where and how we get it from the earth and the impacts of mining or extracting that resource. So aluminum, just to give you a kind of a poster child of that, is probably the best example of this upstream impact. We get aluminum from bauxite, which we have to get almost exclusively from the tropical rainforest because that's where it weathers the rocks enough to get bauxite. And then we have to go clear cut in the tropical rainforest, those precious, biodiverse, oxygen-producing, carbon-sequestering trees. And then we strip mine to get the bauxite, removing the valuable topsoil. Then the bauxite goes up to Iceland, of all places, where it has to go undergo a very energy-intensive process to smelt it into aluminum. And then it's to be refined into alumina and then smelted into aluminum. And then transported all over the world using fossil fuels and emitting greenhouse gases. And then someone drinks out of their soda can for 3 minutes and then throws it in the landfill where it can never be used again. And then we start the process over. So that's linear. That's an example of our linear situation when really that could have been turned into a new can an infinite number of times through recycling. And we wouldn't have to do any of those steps upstream. We could have reduced all of that impact that we had on the tropical rainforest and the environment and everyone involved. So long story short, the way that we do things now, take, make, waste, just makes zero sense, no matter what you care about. So although we talk a lot about the downstream impact of waste, there are tons of negative upstream impacts to the climate and water and indigenous and local communities, not to mention economic waste. So before we figure out what to do with existing products, we need to turn off the tap upstream and stop manufacturing single-use products at breakneck speed with no plan of what will become of them. So that was take of our current system. So then once we've extracted and refined these resources, we have to make them into products, which means, of course, negative impacts in all the same categories we just mentioned. In this model, the products do not come back to the manufacturer usually. So not only are they not designed for recyclability or compostability, but they're also not designed for reuse or repair. And in fact, they're designed specifically usually for obsolescence and disposability. What the heck? That doesn't make any sense. And it is absolutely not a sustainable system that we can continue on. So then from there, then we go downstream to our waste section of our current linear economy. So we obviously have recycling and composting. All of us know that because all of us care about it and interact with that. But that's what we call recovery, where we snatch those resources out of the predominant system. And then we work against the take, make, waste system. We're like going upstream and trying to fight against that existing system. So through that, we're just disrupting kind of the middle section of this line, but we're not redesigning the actual linear system. So those efforts, recycling and composting, are certainly valuable and effective, but it's just not enough. So only 9% of plastics, for example, get recycled. And it's not because you guys aren't recycling, and it's not because we at EcoCycle aren't doing our job to do the right things with the things that you give us. It's because products aren't being designed for recyclability, and producers don't pay to build the infrastructure to make it recyclable because they keep drilling new oil and gas to make new plastics. So downstream, these products are filling up the landfills, filling up our oceans, filling up our soils with microplastics and poisoning animals and people. And all three of these steps are important to circularity and to dismantle when we're talking about dismantling the whole system. And we need to look at solutions in all three of these sections so we can actually redesign and rethink this economy to make it circular. Okay. So that was our linear economy. So now that we've talked about what circular economy is not, which was that, it's time to talk about what it is. So this graphic and this little quote is from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, a foundation which does a tremendous amount of work in circular economy. So it says, looking beyond the current take, make, waste extractive industrial model, a circular economy aims to redefine growth, focusing on positive society-wide benefits. The circular model builds economic, natural, and social capital. It is based on 3 principles: design out waste and pollution, keep products and materials in use, and regenerate natural systems. So we can see that we talk about technical systems, which is this blue circle on the right, meaning our man-made products, and then biological systems, which is the green circle on the left, meaning food and plants and organic materials and natural systems. So basically, instead of pollution or waste, output in a circular system becomes an input, and other things stay in circularity instead of becoming waste at all. So circular economy includes things like city layout and sustainable energy and travel and pretty much everything else you can think of. So it's certainly not defined by waste, but we'll focus on materials for the purposes of this training because we are EcoCycle and we talk about waste. So this training would be like 8 hours long if we didn't just focus on waste. So circular economy is a win whether your concern is the environment or social equity or jobs in the economy or general well-being or just sustainability in the truest sense of the word, meaning that the system is resilient and can continue to exist for a long time. The system sustains itself. Okay, so this is just from again from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation about how circular economy plays out in a citywide level, just so you can see it in play in kind of a more holistic, in a holistic way. So it says, in cities that embed circular economy principles, there is greater proximity between where people live, work, and play. The air gets cleaner as vehicles switch to zero emission engines, and congestion reduces as shared transit increases. More people walk and cycle to work, boosting health and interactions with local businesses and communities. Valuable land previously dedicated to roads and car parks is freed up for green spaces, commerce, offices, houses, and recreation. The layout and design of cities also changes the way materials and products move around them. Instead of throwing materials away to landfill or incineration, a new distributed system of resource management, nutrient flows, and reverse logistics makes the return, sorting, and reuse of products possible. Materials stay in use. So, because this, again, is an EcoCycle presentation, we're only focusing on the materials aspect and not so much the transportation and green spaces and health aspects, but these are all equally important to circular economy and equally important to each other in this system that feeds off of itself. So I wanted to paint kind of a more holistic picture for you all, so you understand that this is much bigger than waste and it's this woven system. So I will send you guys more information on the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and how you can read more on that website and about the other aspects beyond waste. But this is such an optimistic vision for us to be able to look forward to when we feel bogged down in our current linear society. So I think all of us can relate to feeling so overwhelmed. And if we can kind of just like even read this and visualize this happening, I think it's such an optimistic thing because it totally can work and we can totally do it. Okay. This, for example, is Boulder's vision for circular economy. They did a whole workshop with an organization called Metabolic to figure out how to best move towards circularity. So we're not really going to spend any time on this, but you can see that it includes much more than just waste. It's talking about happiness and equity and clean air and all that good stuff. So that's just one example of a city taking that on. Here is another example, another graphic of a circular economy and how recycling is part of it, but not the whole thing. So you can see linear economy is on the left, recycling economy is in the middle, where it's just got like the middle section is kind of disrupted, but it still is linear. And then the circular economy is on the right. So here's why we need to redesign our system for circularity and why we can't keep relying on the linear system on the left. With the global population nearing 8 billion people on a planet with limited and finite resources, our current linear system will not sustain us. If everyone in the world consumed resources at the rate that America does, that the United States do, we would need 5 planets to keep up. So clearly that's not sustainable. We only have one. So we need to act now to look at how 8 billion people can, plus, as we grow, can live on one planet sustainably and equitably and peacefully. So we have to get to the right. So instead of that linear model, we want this model. This is how we're going to look at the circular economy for the purposes of this webinar. So in this presentation, we're going to go through 3 elements of how to create a circular economy. So we're going to take that linear system, the take, make, waste system, and then we're going to bend it into a circle. So that system that we end up with has 3 distinct stages. So first, in this red circle over here on the left, we want to reduce to every degree possible the input or extraction from our natural resources. So that's the upstream. Then we want to keep any natural resources we are using in perpetual use for as long as we possibly can. So that's in between production and disposal, this big purple circle in the middle, where a material ideally stays in perpetual use and reuse as long as possible. It just keeps going around and around. And then we minimize the output or the downstream, where a material is no longer in use, and so it pops out of that purple circle. And then so we want to capture that material as locally and as efficiently as possible, reducing any additional input needed from natural resources, and then get it back in the circular system so it becomes an input again. So I'll be framing it in these terms, and we'll go through each of these categories, the red, the purple, and then the blue, in this presentation as our main steps. So we have our 3 stages. Within each of those, we have these 4 tools in our toolbox that we can use to bend that linear system into a circular one. So our solutions can come from infrastructure, legislation, product design, and consumer behavior. So we can use all 4 tools in each of those stages. So we'll look in this webinar at how we'll look at each of our circles from the previous slide, and then we'll look at these 4 tools and how we can apply them and use them in that particular stage. So like we showed at the very beginning, there are 2 linear systems we need to change. So one is the technical systems, and the other is biological, and we're going to discuss both. So we're going to start with technical. Technical systems are man-made products as opposed to biological systems. So within our technological systems, we're going to talk about each of our 3 stages and our tools within each one. So if these categories aren't making sense to you so far, don't worry, they will as we go through. Just trying to lay it out for you. So I'm just going to show the circular economy graphic real quick before we talk about each of the sections so that you can remember where we are and which one we're talking about. So we're starting with our red section on the left. If we're looking at the big picture here. So let's talk about what upstream looks like for these technical systems. So that is, how can we turn off the tap and avoid the overuse of our natural resources before they've been destroyed, instead of just trying to capture them after the fact. So we need to redesign a system that minimizes extraction of natural resources and impact on the environment by figuring out solutions before the resources are even mined and before the products are even made. So in this section, we're going to look in our toolbox, and we're going to see how we can use each of our 4 tools, so infrastructure, legislation, product design, and consumer behavior at the upstream stage. Okay, so first, let's talk about infrastructure, about how infrastructure can play a role in the reduction of natural resource destruction and the reduction of waste before it even exists. So first of all, for all of our engineers and all of our product designers, there need to be universally accessible resources, collaborative efforts, and hubs for designing sustainable products. There are examples of this, of course, of people working to create sustainable products as they design them. But it's certainly not a requirement for everyone creating packaging, and it really should be. So in the city that we laid out, the utopian city that we all pictured together, there would be a design hub where engineers and designers of packaging would work together to figure out exactly what would happen to their packaging throughout its life cycle and how, in collaboration with people like local recyclers and composters and the folks whose products will be in that packaging. So we'll talk more about product design in a moment. That's its own tool in the toolbox, but this is setting up the infrastructure to make that happen. So speaking of reducing packaging, the best way to reduce single-use packaging is to get rid of it altogether and to replace it with what we call the milkman model. So the milkman model is a consumption model designed for circularity. So you receive your product in a reusable container, you consume that product, and then you return the package or container for continuous reuse. So this is like how we used to do milk, and that's why it's called the milkman model. So it could be, though, used for a number of different products, not just milk. So the most recent popular example of this is Loop, which I'll mention several times throughout this webinar. So Loop is being piloted in several cities, and it has buy-in from a bunch of major companies like Haagen-Dazs and Johnson & Johnson. So within this model, within Loop, if I wanted ice cream, I could order Haagen-Dazs, and then it would come in a standardized but branded stainless steel container. And then I would gobble up all my ice cream, and then I could return the container for it to be washed and reused. So this is such a cool example of a circular economy program, but key to the success of such a program is infrastructure. So if I have to ship my stainless steel container all the way back to Haagen-Dazs, wherever that is, how much impact are we really having when we compare it to the impact that we want to be having? We need to build local infrastructure alongside these packaging efforts. So this is kind of like Vessel's model, for example. That's another company. So their idea is that if I walk into any coffee shop in my city, all of the coffee shops are participating. I will order a drink to go. They'll give it to me in a stainless steel mug, and then I can drop it off in one of the many return kiosks around town, which are as accessible as a trash can. So then Vessel can come pick up all the cups around town in the kiosks, preferably by bike, and they can wash them and then continually redistribute them to coffee shops. And then, so we can take that model and then just imagine extending it to reusable to-go containers for restaurants where there are no disposables. If I go to Wendy's and get takeout, I get it in a reusable container, and there's any number of places that I could return it. We all, in this model, we would all pay a deposit on a reusable to-go container at a restaurant. We drop it off at an easily accessible kiosk for sanitation, and then we get the deposit back, just as you do with Vessel. So infrastructure means not only do we need buy-in from businesses, but we also need education to the consumers. We need the readily available kiosk. We need the bikes. We need the abilities to wash and distribute the cups and containers. And again, all of this on the most local scale possible. So that's just what I mean by infrastructure to support this model and the product design. The last example that I'll use here is a new local company called Nude Foods. Nude Foods Market delivers local organic groceries and household products in zero waste reusable containers to your door every week or 2 weeks by bicycle. And then once you finish with the containers, they pick them up, sanitize them, and then reuse them. And I will send you guys information on all of these things already. Yes, she put the website in the chat, but I will also send out information on all of these companies that I'm kind of dropping in throughout these as examples. So these are just a few examples, but this model can work if we have all this buy-in and all of this infrastructure. We need to have a shared vision and design for branded but standardized packaging. We need to really invest in the infrastructure from the beginning and then make it easy for the customer to understand the why and the how of the new system. And then we can totally do it. So, okay, so that was our infrastructure for upstream success. And now we're going to talk about legislation for upstream success, which is another one of those tools in our toolbox. So the metaphor that I and many environmental advocates use to illustrate our need for legislation to stop the flow of extracting natural resources to create disposable products is that currently our taps, like our faucets, are just all on full blast and our house is very quickly flooding. So right now we're trying desperately to bail out all of the water using a tablespoon or a cup or a bucket by recycling what we can, but it's just not really solving anything because the taps are still on full blast. That's just not how you would address that problem if it was happening to your house. So we need to turn off the tap like you would do if that was happening to you, that's flooding the market with all these disposable products, and then deal with how to bail out the remaining water, meaning single-use plastics and waste. So upstream work is all about turning off that tap that is flooding the environment with waste, specifically plastics, but single-use items in general. So one example of legislation that can turn off the tap is a ban, starting with products that we just largely don't need. So let's stop using our precious natural resources to make products we just don't really need as a society. We've seen examples of this legislation. Polystyrene bans, you might know it as styrofoam, but that's the yucky plastic. Plastic bag bans, plastic straw bans. This doesn't ban the making of these products, but it usually bans the sale and distribution of them in whatever city or town or county or state or country the ban is in. So it effectively cuts off the demand rather than the supply. One obstacle to bans is a preemption. So this is essentially a ban on bans that affects 19 states, including Colorado, for plastics specifically. So here's a little map about where we have bans, where we have fees and taxes, and where we have preemption. You can see Colorado is red because we have a preemption here. So locally, what that means is we could decide unanimously in Boulder County or City of Boulder or wherever you are that we want to ban food grade polystyrene, for example, but the preemption in the state of Colorado says that no local government is allowed to ban or restrict any type of plastic, but the state can. So we've been trying to get rid of this preemption from the books. We've been trying to strike it from the books for a while, and we'll continue trying to get rid of it with your support. In the meantime, while we can't ban plastics here, we can pass taxes or fees on certain plastic items. So in Boulder County, for example, I'm gonna keep using that example because that's where I am, but I know that you are all from, you're tuning in from all over the place. So City of Boulder has a fee on plastic bags, and Louisville is currently working to pass a tax on November's ballot for those single-use bags. So while both taxes and fees are great and they've been proven to be super effective, ideally, rather than having the responsibility for reduction fall to the consumers, it really should fall on the producers. Another way to turn off the tap of using resources indiscriminately is to legislate that producers must use recycled content to minimize resource extraction and to support true recycling, where a material is recovered and then turned into the same type of product again. So legislation like minimum recycled content laws require that producers use a certain amount of recycled content in their new products. So Wisconsin, for example, has a statute that requires plastic containers to consist of at least 10% recycled material. Many states also have mandates about recycled content paper, although that's usually applying to state agencies and kind of on the purchasing end rather than the production end. But that is a potential tool that we can use for sure. There are certain laws about what sort of plastics can and cannot be made into what type of packaging. Ari, I think there's like little pictures that should be on this section, but oh, it was just a stupid one. That was our recycled content one. So there are certain laws about what sort of plastics can and cannot be made into what type of packaging. So for example, there are guidelines restricting the use of PVC. So PVC is a number 3 plastic as food packaging. So there's legislation around making PVC into food packaging because polyvinyl chloride, PVC, has lots of health and kind of toxin implications, but PVC is still made into lots of other stuff. So as recyclers, we still see toys and cosmetic plastics, for example, just to name a few, being made out of PVC, this number 3. So recyclers still have to deal with it, even though it's virtually unrecyclable. So same goes for number 6, polystyrene, that one I just mentioned, and number 7, which is the other category of plastics, or polycarbonate. So there are very minimal recycling markets for those crap plastics, those 3, 6, and 7s. And therefore, plastics producers just shouldn't be allowed to make things out of them all the time like they do and expect us to deal with them. They're toxic, they're non-recyclable, and currently the burden of those 3, 6, and 7 plastics is falling on recyclers, consumers, and the environment rather than the producers. So there are alternatives. They don't need to make all that stuff out of 3, 6, and 7. We can also pass legislative incentives to recover more materials and prevent them from going to the landfill. So I don't know if you know this, but Colorado is terrible at recycling. We are sitting around a 17% recycling rate, which is abysmal. It's embarrassing. So it's half the national average, which is 35, which is not even good. The national average is not even good, and we're not even half of that in the state of Colorado. So part of that reason for our shameful recycling rate is that out here in the West, we just have a lot of space available. So if people are thinking of, so we have a lot of room, and therefore landfills are just cheap, cheap, cheap. There's just not a problem creating landfills because we have the room for it. So if landfills are cheap, and most people think of waste as a landfill space issue, it's hard to advocate for investing in landfill diversion programs. But one success story, a recent one, is the Front Range Waste Diversion Bill, which we passed last year with a bunch of our friends, and essentially puts a fee on the materials being landfilled. And then that fee goes into this big, beautiful pot of money that people all across the state can apply for to do outreach campaigns, build a recycling drop-off, or get compost bins, or any other landfill diversion, meaning taking stuff out of the landfill, not out, but diverting it away. Any project that does that sort of thing. So the last tool to talk about here is subsidies in the legislative realm for upstream. So for the most part, the plastics industry doesn't buy back their own plastic to make new plastic products. So when I recycle my number 1 soda bottle, it almost always gets turned into something like a carpet or yoga pants or running shoes, something like that. The people making the bottles in the first place aren't taking it back because that bottle is, oh, sorry. Wow, my own writing just really threw me off. Okay, the people that are making the bottles in the first place aren't taking back that bottle that I recycled, hoping that it would be turned into a new bottle, even though they could do that because it's subsidized for them to keep drilling new oil and gas to make new plastic, creating an artificial financial incentive to use virgin natural resources over recycled. So there are many federal extraction subsidies that are creating this uneven playing field for recovered materials and incentivizing natural resource destruction, such as in the paper industry. That's another example. So logging is incentivized. This, again, doesn't make any sense. We're subsidizing building roads into usually public lands, usually at taxpayer expense. And then we're logging, we're cutting down our precious trees, we're pumping virgin pulp full of bleach that then creates dioxins, which is an incredibly toxic substance. And then we're making new paper out of trees when we could be making new paper out of recycled paper that we already have instead of new trees, and avoiding the natural resource destruction as well as the transportation impacts. So for this reason, post-consumer recycled products, because of that subsidy, are usually falsely more expensive than products made from virgin materials. But if we got rid of those subsidies, then post-consumer recycled material, the stuff made of not virgin materials, would be allowed to compete and actually beat out the virgin content. So the market would actually support the right thing if we got rid of incentives. Isn't it frustrating? Okay, so here's our next tool in the toolbox, which is product design. So we started to talk about this in our infrastructure slide. So product design is also important to talk about upstream. We already talked about loop. So in addition to making the infrastructure, here's our milkman with all his modern products. In addition to making the infrastructure for that model, we have to focus on minimizing the extraction of our natural resources and the transportation and distribution impacts by designing products specifically for continual reuse. So that should be the first thing we try. And if it's not truly feasible, then we can move down the list. But the goal of every product or packaging design should be to make it reusable so we don't even have to think about disposal. So next, like we talked about with numbers 3, 6, and 7 plastics, we need to stop designing things that have a huge environmental impact upstream and have no end market. So by end market, I just mean that there has to be someone that you can continually sell the market to, who is ideally turning that item back into whatever item it already was. And that's just what a recycling end market means. So it should be up to the manufacturer / producer to build that market and infrastructure by funding recycling and or buying back their own product to make it into that same product again. So that goes for composting too, but we'll talk about that when we talk about biological systems. Okay, and then lastly, labeling. So this goes along with the bullet points above. It all goes together. It's all a big, it's all a bunch of cogs spinning together. So because manufacturers of plastics in particular, but again, generally single-use products, are not usually involved in what happens to their products after they send them out, their labeling is usually equally unhelpful to the consumer and recycler. As a consumer, if you look at all of these labels, do you know what they mean? Do you know what to do with the thing? I don't even, and I work here, so. Although there have been some efforts in this area, like the how to recycle labels with the 2 in the middle, we can't feasibly label products universally for recycling because recycling guidelines change from place to place. So whether something's recyclable depends on the local infrastructure and the local facility and the local markets. And that's hugely variable across the country. So Boulder County's recycling guidelines look different from Denver's even, which certainly look different from rural Iowa and definitely different from a different country. So when a global soda company, for example, makes a plastic bottle and ships it all over the world, they can't label their product like recyclable if you're in the following 200 cities. So the other issue though, is that not only do most producers not work to accurately label their product for disposal, even though that's not really feasible at this time, but they actually work to deceive the consumer about the disposal and about the impact of that product. So we call that greenwashing. Greenwashing is when a company tries to appear more environmentally friendly than they are, or try to make their product appear more environmentally friendly than it is. An example of this is when a company makes a vague, unfounded claim about being environmental, like this bottled water here. Bottled water is not a great thing for the environment. Or when a company makes a regular plastic item, maybe with a little bit of plant material in there, and it calls it biodegradable. So like I said, because we don't have universal guidelines, it would be hard for companies to start accurately labeling their products for disposal for recyclability specifically right now based on the current system. We could have universal guidelines and therefore universal labeling If the producers got their act together on product design and were involved in the markets and infrastructure of recycling, at the very least, they need to stop greenwashing, and then they could actually design their products for sustainability, and then they can label it as such. So now we come to the consumer's role in the upstream phase of products. So this is our fourth tool in the toolbox. Remember, we had infrastructure, legislation, product design, and now we're on consumer behavior. So like we just talked about with greenwashing, even if we as consumers, as people, are trying our best, our very hardest to be green, we're really fighting an uphill battle against these corporations that are flooding our house, right? The taps are on, they're flooding our house and making our fight for sustainability even harder. For those of you who were around in 1971, or for those of you who are in the sustainability world and interested in this kind of thing, you probably remember the airing of the famous Crying Indian commercial. So if you don't know it, I'll send it out in the follow-up email. It's also linked in the slides, which I'll send out later, so you can watch it. But its message is for people to stop littering. So the tagline that the actor says is, "People start pollution, people can stop it." So the whole message here is that we as individuals, we, me, you, have created this dystopian scene, and it's up to us to do better. So this was relevant 50 years ago in the context of littering, and it was effective in stopping that behavior. It is an example that we see in sustainability marketing and communications and things like that. But now it's 50 years later, and although the problem has drastically changed, the messaging we still hear from producers and even educators is still focused on individual consumer actions. So today, by far, the greatest source of pollution and greenhouse emissions comes from manufacturers, not individuals, not consumers. It was actually BP who popularized the idea of an individual carbon footprint, BP, oil, even though our individual footprints are minuscule in comparison to those of BP and these other huge or corporations. So we as individuals are not the ones responsible for the fact that we have an ocean full of plastic at this point. So the problem is systemic, and we need to treat it as such. We're doing a lot in the realm of consumer responsibility, but that has to be paired with effective systemic producer responsibility for that truly to be impactful. Huge corporations are not only cranking out pollutants into our environment, poisoning our water and soils, accelerating climate change, and disproportionately affecting Indigenous people and people of color, but they're committed to making us think that it's our fault. That's a whole PR thing that they're doing. So you may have read the NPR article just this past weekend or heard it on the radio. So it's about how plastics recycling and how the petrochemical companies have strategically created false illusions about the recyclability of their products. So the bottom line of that article is that producers have to take responsibility for their product. It's not your fault that you don't understand those million labels that I just showed. And even if you did, might not be a market for it anyway. Your local place might not even be able to recycle it. So if you forget to refuse a straw at a restaurant, oh, sorry, that was wrong. If you forget to refuse a straw at a restaurant, you are not the one filling the ocean with plastics and creating the Pacific garbage patch. But each person does have an individual impact and can absolutely make a positive difference, both in your individual consumption and in your power as a consumer. So every time you opt for a plastic-free option, you send a market signal that those industries have to respond to. And as we work with those industries, believe me, they are hearing you and they're definitely feeling the pressure. So they're seeing a new wave of consumerism. It's us. We reject single-use plastics. If you bring your own mug, for example, every day to get coffee at your coffee shop, think about how much waste just you are saving in 1 year. So that's great and so important to keep doing it. But we also have to work to advocate for systemic change so we're all set up for success. So beyond that, I like to always come back to walking that line that yes, your individual actions matter. They do. Don't let anyone tell you that you're not making a difference by doing the little things that you do every single day. But also at the same time, don't feel the pressure of ruining the planet because the people create pollution thing is no longer the message that we need to be following. We need to be holding producers accountable at the same time. So beyond that, on an individual level as a consumer, the main thing that you can do to contribute to the upstream solution is just reduce and refuse single-use items as much as you possibly can. So bulk buying is obviously huge here. This is a little complicated with COVID, as is the coffee mug thing. But wherever you can bring your own containers and buy in bulk and refuse, if you're ordering takeout, refuse the little plastic forks and napkins and stuff. That's great. I will send out a plastic-free challenge that you can do on your own in our follow-up email. That is great and makes you think about a lot of plastics that you didn't know you even could reduce. Another helpful and important action as a consumer is investing, just when you buy, in durable, long-lasting products. So whether we're talking about clothing or furniture or electronics or anything else, think of it as an investment and buy whatever will last you the longest so you don't have to replace it next year. Okay. Whew. So that was upstream. So that was our little red guy. So we're just going to revisit our graphic here just every time we switch so that you can picture where we are in our little map here. So we just covered upstream, red guy, and now we're moving into this big purple wheel. So keeping resources in circulation for as long as possible. Once we have those resources that we minimized over here, we're going to keep them in circulation over here. So as we're redesigning our systems, economies, and communities for circularity, we've talked about upstream, turning off the tap, and preventing the destruction of our natural resources before it happens, not just recovering resources after the fact. But now we're talking about what to do with that water, right? Now that it's come out of the tap, not literally the water, but using that tap metaphor. So we have to figure out how to keep these natural resources in the cycle for as long as we possibly can. Again, we're going to look at our toolbox here and talk about how infrastructure, legislation, product design, and consumer behavior can be solutions at this stage between production and disposal. So we'll start with infrastructure again. Like the hubs that I mentioned upstream, those designing hubs, we should have centers or hubs that are dedicated to sharing, reusing, and repairing. Instead of all of us just throwing away items that someone else could use and buying things that somebody else had but didn't want, the city of Boulder, these hubs should make that happen. So the city of Boulder is looking at adding a reuse and repair hub like this to our location at 6400 Arapahoe, where Charm and Ari currently are right now. So another idea that the Ellen MacArthur Foundation proposes is an app or a smart map. So we have this kind of thing for disposal. We have the EcoCycle A to Z app where you can put in yoga mat and we'll tell you where to take it. But imagine that on such a bigger scale. So imagine that I have a lawnmower that I no longer want. So I can go into this resource and we can go through the list. So does it work? Here's how to give it to someone who needs it. Is it broken? Here's where and how to fix it. Do you need to recycle it as a last resort? Here's where you can recycle it. And then, oh, before you buy a new one, here's where to rent one so we can all share it. So we'd also have to make this, of course, universally accessible so that it's not limited to those with smartphones and access to apps. A used marketplace is also a cool example of an infrastructure solution here. So, but it's for industry. So it's kind of like a thrift shop for industry. So industries have lots of waste. Wait, sorry. Okay, great. Sorry, I got a little note from Ari about who can see what right now. So industries have lots of waste. So whether you're talking about wood or metal or cement or textiles, whatever, at a materials marketplace, they can share their leftovers for others to make things instead of throwing it away. So if I have to buy a bulk, if I'm an industry and I have to buy a bulk amount of materials, but I don't need that exact amount, then I have to order up, right? And then, but if I can go in on that order with someone else who's making something or share my leftovers with them, then we all win. I think I'm not paying attention to the chat because I'm talking, but we will share the A to Z app as well on my phone. I'm gonna send you guys such a meaty follow-up email. You don't even know, it's gonna have so many resources. Don't even worry about it. If I know that I talk fast and I'm covering a lot here, so I promise we will have, you will have things at your fingertips at the end of this. So the purple stage, right, the stage that we're in, this big wheel, is all about reusing, repairing, and sharing. So that's how we keep resources in circularity for as long as possible. So looking at our toolbox, we're at legislation now. The main piece of legislation that we'll talk about here is right to repair. So like I mentioned, when we talk about our linear system, most of our products are actually designed specifically for obsolescence and or disposal. So not only that, but many manufacturers don't make repair even possible. So our first special guest, Wayne, will talk about this in just a moment. He will talk about how we can use legislation to fix this. So keep that in your brain for just a few moments until I hand it over to Wayne. All right, so Consumer behavior is our third tool. So here's what we can do as consumers once the product is already made and before disposal to keep it in circularity as long as possible. So fixing is a big part of it, and Wayne will talk a lot about that. So I'm not gonna do much on that right now, but we can do a lot with sharing too in the meantime. So we can create a sharing economy, especially with things that we don't all use every day. So unless you're like my dad, you don't use your power tools every day, and he's a carpenter. So I have like a power drill. I don't ever use it. So I share it with my neighbors, and we literally all share one in this little block. So it's silly for us to all purchase power tools and then have them all sitting around in our garage waiting for the 4 times that we use them throughout the year and then throw them out and then get a new one. So our friends and next door neighbors at 6400 Arapahoe Resource Central, a different organization, but our good friends, have a tool library for this very reason, so that you can find that in Boulder and probably elsewhere. So what if this idea, what if we just had libraries for everything that we didn't use every day? Libraries for toys and lawn mowers and house paint, whatever. We can get really creative with that. So thrifting is a great way to get things new to you without buying virgin materials, and it's a great way to get rid of things that you don't need anymore without throwing them in the trash. So renting goes along with sharing economy as well. There are some cool models here for kids' clothes specifically that I'll share. It's a company called Circos, and it lets parents rent baby and toddler and kiddo clothes of all sizes and types, and then they send them back when they're outgrown. So in the first 2 years of life, this is a statistic that I didn't know, an average child needs 280 pieces of clothing, most of which are only worn for about 2 to 3 months. So as a result, the vast amount of usable kids' clothing ends up in landfills, losing value and creating environmental impacts, while meanwhile, someone who could have used those has to buy virgin material clothes. So through circular economy, these clothes are returned and then washed and then rented out to clothe another kiddo. And then when all of these kiddos have outgrown it and it's totally worn out, they're recycled into a new piece, like a baby blanket or something like that. So they're brought back into the system, into that purple wheel after they've gotten all the use as whatever it already was. So one of our eco leaders, Mary Marland, for example, has a company called Wild Doves, and she works with a similar model, but she is actually a seamstress, so she'll actually modify the piece. You can send it back to her and she'll like let it out and it will grow with your kid. Amazing. The bottom line here, whether we're talking about kids' clothes or anything, is that it's silly for us all to own things that we don't use regularly or we don't use for a long time when we can all share them. A sharing economy is totally the future. If you just look at Airbnb or Uber, we can do that with everything. Okay, so here's our 4th tool in our toolbox to bend our linear system into a circular one. So talking about how we can use product design to keep resources in circulation. So again, in an ideal world, all products are being designed to be durable, reusable items that will not have to go into any bin for a long time after use. But if we can't do reusable, we want to design products to be able to circulate in the system as long as possible without additional input from mined natural resources. So an example of a work in progress of designing products to be more circular is the Solo Cup being replaced with an aluminum cup at the CU Stadium. So a Solo Cup is a number 6, that polystyrene that I described as a crap plastic, for which there is no recycling market really. Aluminum, on the other hand, is infinitely recyclable. So it's obviously far better than a Solo Cup in the recycling world. But that only makes sense if the infrastructure is there. So I told you all at the beginning of this talk about how the upstream impacts of aluminum, right? The whole like tropics, Iceland, everywhere, 3 seconds, throw it in the landfill. So that was, we're not fans of that, and we don't like the upstream impacts of aluminum. So if the aluminum is not going in the recycling, if all of our drunk CU football fans are just still throwing them in the trash, then replacing those cups with aluminum was not a good idea, because aluminum is way more valuable material than plastic, and it has to be recycled to have this positive impact. So products must be designed based around existing infrastructure, not just throwing out products and expecting us to build infrastructure without their help. So this goes for composting as well as recycling. If we're replacing Solo Cups with aluminum cups, We can't just do that based on the fact that aluminum is more recyclable generally than number 6 plastics. We need to ensure that the infrastructure is there and used, and 100% of our people can recycle 100% of the aluminum 100% of the time. So certainly we're not ragging on CU here or Ball or any of the people involved. I went to CU, I worked for them for years. We're just clarifying that in this example in circular economy, aluminum replacing plastic works if the infrastructure is there to set up people to recycle all of the aluminum all the time. So products should also be designed, again, not for obsolescence and not to break immediately, but also to be fixable. So with resources on how to fix them also. So Wayne will talk about that, which is a good segue into Wayne's introduction. So Wayne Seltzer is one of EcoCycle's wonderful partners through the YouFixit Clinic. I don't know if you've been to the YouFixit Clinics. I have, and they're so fun. And Wayne is just a joy, and he always teaches so much. So thank you so much for being here, Wayne. I'm going to pass it over to you now. Here are Wayne's slides, and he's going to pop on for a little bit. I think you're still on mute, Wayne. Can I unmute?
There you go.
Okay.
I didn't have the right to unmute, like the right to repair. Thank you. Rosie, that was great. I thought I knew all this stuff. Very informative, great way to present this. Very cool. I'm going to share the recording with some of my friends. So I'm Wayne. I've been the organizer for the Boulder YouFixit Clinic, which is started out as just a fun idea and has turned out to be much bigger than I thought. So we've been doing this for almost 5 years now. We're really part of a global fix-it movement. There are actually somewhere around 1,200 similar fix-it clinics, repair cafes, whatever you want to name them around the world. Quite amazing. And they take different approaches at this, but it's all about what we're talking about. If something is broken, what's your choice? Stick it in the trash can. Hey, if it's e-waste, it's actually against the law in some places like Boulder. Maybe donate it to somewhere, but who wants a broken thing? We certainly can recycle it, and that is awesome. But this project says, can we do better? Can we reuse it by repairing it? So the way this works is we have these free events where we have volunteer repair coaches who like to fix things and like to help people. And we pair them up and we dig into all kinds of stuff. Number one thing we fixed, lamps, lots of lamps, lots of vacuums, lots of kitchen appliances, really strange things like an 8-foot tall animatronic skeleton for Halloween with a severed head, very fun. We fixed crazy things like that. We've been tracking what we've been doing. We have a 67% repair success rate, although our goal really isn't fix things. It's more consumer education. It's more about being a big part of this movement. Of course, because of the current situation, as they say, because of COVID, we're not doing in-person, face-to-face clinics. And we pivoted to these global Zoom events like this with these other clinics and cafes around the world. We're doing them several times a month. And it is really reassuring and hopeful to see that around the planet, I mean literally, we have Jakarta and Istanbul and Paris all working together fixing waffle irons and toaster ovens. There's a worldwide fix-it culture, and the people are deeply concerned about the topics Rosie talked about and want to get involved and do something. So as opposed to being, well, I can't fix things now, I'm actually doing this stuff with all these people, and it's very, very cool. So next slide, please. I don't need to show this group this picture. You know that we throw a lot of stuff in landfills. Question is, like, how much of that are electronic products? And a lot of the things we do fix are electronic for some reason. A lot of mechanical wood things, but mostly electronic. An old statistic, over 3 million tons of electronic products in 2013. Of course, it's more there than that. And as we're doing here in many places, we're trying to recycle these products, and we can recover plastic and metal from these things instead of just throwing them into the ground. But you know, if we can, much, much better to repair and reuse. Next slide. This picture is actually old, but this is the way charm used to look when you drive up and you want to drop off these kinds of things. And they get sorted and they go to downstream recyclers who will turn them into mostly plastic, mostly mostly metal. And you know, there's some money in the materials, some more than others, right? I would argue, though, that if you dig through these piles of things, which I have done, you'll find things that might even be working or might be very close to working. Like, for example, I think there's a vacuum cleaner over there on the right. 90% chance dog hair or cat hair is clogging up some part of this thing that needs to be taken apart and cleaned. It's not that easy to do for some products. There's a space heater, who knows, might have a bad element, might be able to be fixed. There's a fan back there that might need to be cleaned up and take some of the dirt out so the blade can turn, or there might be a little part that's failed I'll talk about. But awesome though charm does, it's actually something that we should do all over the planet. It's not that common yet. And only a small percent of the landfill stream is recycled through places like charm, but we can do better. We can actually fix these things. Next, please. So what are our challenges in doing this? Well, are products repairable? I think in the beginning of the industrial age, things were designed to be repaired. I mean, they're expensive, they're hard to make. They're made out of common things, so people could fix them. And as time has gone on, things have been harder and harder to repair. And we all have experienced this. We know things like you buy a new cool Wi-Fi connected rechargeable thingy, and you don't realize that inside of it is a battery that is glued in place. And when that battery stops charging, and it will stop taking a charge, what are you going to do? Pry it open with a knife? Maybe you'll fix your Apple Watch? Probably not. It's hard to do that. So this is something we want to think about. Can you make a product that has replaceable components, especially the ones we know are going to fail? They're things that will just give up over time. And even more troubling is that there are manufacturers who don't really want us to repair their products. They require special tools to do this. If you've ever looked at the bottom of, say, a electric water kettle, you look underneath there and you'll see those aren't Phillips head screws. They're triangle shaped screws. What the heck is that? Well, they're designed to prevent you from opening it, partially to keep you from shocking yourself, but otherwise they just don't want the liability of you trying to fix it. So the industry has responded with special tools, and we have those at our fix-it clinics, and we make this possible to open these things up. More troubling is there are software products, software implementations that prevent repair. For example, if you have a very expensive iPhone 11, and let's say you have two, because you're that good. You have two iPhone 11s. You take them apart and you take the batteries out and swap them one to the other and turn them back on. Apple will tell you, hey, those don't look to be the correct battery. And we know that this is one small step away from saying, you tried to replace the battery in your phone. We don't want you to do that. You're not an authorized repair dealer or something. And batteries are common in phones. They wear out. You should be able to replace them. It should be easy. The first cell phones, the batteries were, take off the back case, put in a battery. Now they're glued and soldered and sealed into place. And then there's special tools, need special components. You can't get to them. And then are there the consumer skills? We used to learn these things. I'm old enough that when I went to middle school and high school, we actually had shop class. And I was one of those strange people that took electronic shop and wood shop and calculus, right? So I think this shouldn't be separate. If you're going to, whatever track you're going to, learning practical repair skills should be part of what's going on. Well, now, the rage is STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, math / experiential learning. I teach classes like that at CU and around town. These are kind of, the modern equivalent of shop class with some fancier labels on them, but these are practical skills. We use our own very human diagnostic capabilities. I don't think it's restricted to engineers to say, well, my complex thing is made up of a bunch of simple stuff. Most of those are still working. Let's figure out which one's not working. We can do this, right? Next slide, please. What are opportunities? Well, as I said, lots of education things happening. Maker spaces, you might have one where you live. We have lots of them in Boulder. These are all places where we can celebrate and do repair. They're in schools, they're in libraries, they're out throughout communities. We can decide that technology is cool and fixing things are cool too. That could be a cultural shift, that it's actually something that's desirable to have the skills to fix things. I have this picture because one of our early clinics, I think this was outdoors at EcoCycle. It's hard to do a clinic outdoors when the wind blows and blows the screws away across the parking lot. This young woman had a battery-powered Razor scooter, and it was just like 5 minutes past its warranty and it didn't work, and she wasn't sure what to do, and she asked the manufacturer what to do. They said, sorry. We gave her some tools. She took it apart, figured out where the chain belonged, put it back together, and in 10 minutes was electric scootering around the parking lot at EcoCycle. Awesome. Now she's a freshman at CU, and I hope she's taking some engineering classes. So that's awesome. So these events, these fix-it events are happening all over the place. As I said, right now, mostly virtual. Public libraries are good places. Libraries love this. If you think about a library, it's not just where you get the books anymore. It's where you access informal learning capabilities. So if you don't have a triangular base shaped screwdriver to open up your electric kettle, maybe the library does. Just like the library may have a copy of a book that you don't have at home or whatever. Pop-ups, they're popular. There's an organization in London that has this portable cart that just shows up at random times on a street corner and, whoa, go get your stuff and we'll fix your phone or your coffee pot or whatever. Fix-it cafes. There was an article in New York Times actually that spurred me to do this in 2016 about a repair cafe in Amsterdam. Yes, cafe, Amsterdam, but this is actually hang out, have some coffee and whatever, but there's tools and people get together with their broken stuff and their repair skills and make it a social event to go fix things. Awesome, fun stuff, opportunities to do that. We once did an event at Cafe Soleil in South Boulder called Fix a Coffee Pot in a Coffee Shop. It was very popular. We fixed a lot of coffee things. Mine actually is broken today. Of all things, I have to fix my own espresso maker. Next slide, please. So why do we do fix-it clinics? In the near term, absolutely, it's about landfill diversion, and a lot of my colleagues keep very careful track of this. In fact, at their events, they weigh things so they can track how many. We're a little loose about that, but that's what about it is. It's definitely a fun community activity. We absolutely want to teach safe and effective repair. Rep. Oh, I put my graphic over my text. Sorry. So yes, it is possible to repair things safely, and I coach my coaches on how to do that. No crappy fixes. And we do it because it's so profitable. No, this is a volunteer thing, pretty much volunteer around the world. We do it because we like to do it. And as long as there's an abundance of coaches willing to do this, it's going to keep on going. But really, the long term is about developing educated consumers. If you have a lifetime of consuming, if you are able to figure out what's the repairable, what's the longer lasting product, you would buy that. In fact, when I first presented the idea for a clinic at EcoCycle World Headquarters, the amazingly optimistic, idealistic team said, what if one day there was a logo on a product that told you what its repairability index is, just like we have the plastic number, right? So you would know, oh, this one gets a high rating because I can change the battery. Not there yet, but it's possible. Love to have those things. And we would love to influence manufacturers to tell them, hey, I want to buy your product because I know it's repairable and you support that right. And there are manufacturers that think the way. Most of them don't have that bottom line. Next slide, please. To get this happening, I've learned this from my colleagues around the world. Partnerships are absolutely essential. Number one partner, EcoCycle. Boulder You Fix the Clinic is part of EcoCycle, partnered, whatever. We never worked out the formal details. We're kind of loose on that. There's an organization called fixtheclinic.org who actually challenged me to start one. My friend Peter is out in Berkeley, and I had dinner with him a few years ago, and he said, Wayne, Berkeley has a Fix-It clinic. How come Boulder doesn't? Okay, I didn't know that challenge would be slightly disruptive in my life. We do our events at all kinds of venues, maker spaces like the Boulder Public Library's Building 61, the Boulder Hackerspace, the Longmont Public Library, unusual places like the Phoenix Asylum, which is a maker space for more artisans, and we've done clinics there. As I said, coffee shop. Um, Oracle volunteers. I used to work for Oracle, and a lot of corporate sponsors will help make these events happen as corporate events. Look at this t-shirt. The Oracle Volunteers Program, Oracle, a global corporation, says, advancing education, protecting the environment, enriching communities. That's exactly what we're about, right? And then lower right corner, iFixit, which is a company that makes repair tools, a lot about portable devices, but iFixit.org is sort of the political action part of this, which is very much, those guys are very much behind Rate to Repair, and they've been very kind to give us tools. Next, please. All right, here is a challenge for you. Please do not advance the slide. So I want you to answer this in chat. Wake up if you're not paying attention. What is this thing? We see them a lot in repair clinics. It's about a ½ inch long. It has some cryptic nomenclature on it. It says TF192C, 192 degrees centigrade, 16 amps, 250 volts, commonly found in small appliances. If you know what that is, type it in the chat, and then think about how does it influence product life? This little thing influence product life. And more hints. In that bin, we saw a charm. Lots of those products have them in there, and some of them might have a dead one or a blown up one, which has made that product now inoperable. I see Rosie knows, right? Oh, a battery, a resistor, a battery terminal. Okay, a ceramic resistor. All right, all right. Give you a few more seconds. Ooh, fuse is getting closer. Capacitor. Yeah, well, I have a capacitor. This came from my dishwasher. $10 capacitor saved me $1,000 of buying a new dishwasher. Just a bad capacitor, which the manufacturer does not sell. Boo. All right. Next slide for the reveal. It's a thermal fuse. So if you said fuse, you're there. So a regular fuse says, wait a minute, that's too much current. That's a bad thing. I don't want to have a fire. A circuit breaker in your house or an old fuse panel, if you still live in a place with fuses in your panel, you should get those fixed. Protects the wiring of your house. If too much current is flowing through, you don't want things to catch fire. This also prevents fires. What it does is if the temperature in your product gets too high, this thermal fuse melts internally, breaks a circuit like a switch, and now your product doesn't work. Let's take a real life example. Here is a common mini food processor. And we actually had one that looked just like this, I don't know how many years ago at a fix-it clinic. And we always ask people, tell me about your thing when it was working. What happened when it broke and what have you done since then? So this story was, well, it's been working great. And one day I thought I'd grind up some Parmesan cheese to make some grated Parmesan cheese. So I put a chunk of very hard Parmesan in there and I pressed chop or grind or whatever. And the blade spun around and it got stuck and it hummed and it hasn't worked since. Sad. And now there's nothing to do. Well, if you take this apart, you can find that there's a thermal fuse usually taped to the windings of the motor. So when you take a motor and stop it from turning, all that current that wants to go into rotational energy is now stuck and has to go somewhere. So it becomes heat through the wires. You made your food processor into a toaster inadvertently. So the thermal fuse breaks, prevents your house from catching on fire. That is awesome. They're really not replaceable. You can buy them for $1 retail. When we used to have a place called Radio Shack, they used to sell them. Now you have to hunt on Amazon or eBay to find them. I actually bought a big bag of them of all different voltages and currents and temperatures. They're designed to, the 192C says, ooh, if this environment goes above 192 degrees centigrade, then open up. So they're rated for different things. $10 for 100. I mean, I have, plenty. Bring them to all the clinics. So where's the opportunity here? So we could have used some other kind of device to prevent the fire. It could have been resettable. There could be a little button in the back that you could press and say, oops, sorry about the Parmesan cheese. If I press this button, I'll now reset this. Promise not to try to grate bricks or anything like that again, right? If you have a vacuum cleaner with a power brush, with a rotating brush that picks up dog hair, those things jam all the time. So they actually did spend the extra 50 cents to put in a resettable overload device. But in kitchen appliances and fans and space heaters, they tend to use these things. So if if we could convince manufacturers, please spend the extra 50 cents to put in a resettable thermal device, Charm wouldn't see so many of these things in the bin. And we would continue to use our products and continue to have long-lasting products. You really didn't break it, you just temporarily misused it. Why don't we have that? There's no incentive. Nobody shops on Amazon or goes to Target or Best Buy and they see under the description of this product includes resettable thermal fuse. No one knows what the heck that means. It wouldn't be a differentiator. Consumer Reports isn't yet at that level they can describe those differences. But we think, and our coaches and Fix-It Clinic participants around the world think we can do better. So every time we encounter a bad product design, a non-repairable product design, we'd like to go put some feedback in. All right, next slide. So Rosie talked about the legislative part of this, the sort of political part of it. So there is a right to repair movement going on. It's actually going on globally. One place to look about this is repair.org. There's lots of places talking about repair as sort of a global thing for the US. And their quote is, "We have the right to repair everything we own." And it turns out some manufacturers are making this absolutely impossible. Top of the list, John Deere farm equipment. You can buy $1 million piece of farm equipment. These things are computers with wheels now, right? They're hooked up to GPS, they follow programs, they do awesome, cool things that Leandra will probably tell us about. You know, if you can put the right kind of water and the right kind of fertilizer in the right place of your field, you can get better crop yield. That is awesome. So they make amazing equipment that does that right. But John Deere won't let you fix it. So it monitors everything on the machine. And if you do something like, I don't know, try to change a brake shoe, it will shut down and the computer in the cockpit will say, sorry, I can't run now until an authorized John Deere tech comes out and takes care of this. So they sell very expensive service contracts because that's part of their revenue stream. I mentioned iPhone batteries. You'll find if you try to fix your car, there's lots of things now in your car that will prevent you from doing that. Your car is really a network of little computers these days that all are talking to each other and watching what you do and saying, no, can't fix that. Good news is our state governments are working on right to repair bills. In fact, in Colorado, we have the Consumer Digital Repair Bill of Rights, something I was testifying on in a hearing, but it got tabled because of COVID, because our legislation wasn't able to meet, and this didn't make the popular list. Maybe next term we'll do this, I hope so. Massachusetts actually has on the ballot right now, they've gone that far. In fact, right to repair got a lot of press when Elizabeth Warren said if she were elected president, she would make a national right to repair bill, right? So Massachusetts is going to vote on this. This one's specific about automobiles, but it's in general the thing. The auto industry is spending a fortune fighting this bill. So lots of campaign ads. Next slide, please. All right, so what can you do if you're interested in this? And I know you're interested in this because you wouldn't have come to this event if this wasn't something you're passionate about. Number one, be a repair advocate. If you have something that's broken, give yourself the chance to search for repair solutions. There's so many guides out there all over the internet. Hey, I've written a few. Someone might have already figured out how to fix your exact problem. So see if it's there. It might be easy. If you're successful at repairing something, or even if you're frustrated, let other people know and build your community about this. Develop a repair culture, right? Just like we've developed a recycling culture. Come to one of our Boulder Youth Fix-It clinics. I'll give you the webpage. We have a place you can sign up. We're hosting one later this month, and it will be global again. If you have the inclination and like this sort of thing, volunteer as a coach. Come to one of our clinics and just watch what goes on and you know, sort of train yourself. If you don't have something like this in your town, go start one. We'll help you. Fixitclinic.org has some resources how to start a clinic. And then, you know, support our right to repair legislation. I was hoping by this time we would have some really cool stuff going on in Colorado about this, and we would be batting down all the manufacturers who said, we don't want that, it's unsafe. I really had a fun time in a hearing explaining to AT&T lawyers that if you change a battery on a phone, it doesn't take the global phone network down. They really thought that was you know, babies will die is typically their response to why they don't want legislation to happen. So we will be talking to representatives in Colorado. Representative Brianna Titone is heading up this particular bill. She has come to many of our clinics and has brought things to fix herself, and she's a real advocate and gets it. So cool. All right, next slide. So wrap up. If you are interested in this, here is my email address, boulderyouthfixtheclinic.org. There's an email list you can sign up. We have a pretty active community. We have a Facebook thing going on where the events happen. I'm happy to answer your questions and help you become a repair advocate. Questions at the end. Thanks.
Yay. That was so awesome, Wayne. Thank you so much. I don't know if you can see the chat box, but people are like, we need to do a TED Talk. We need to have a Wayne Talk. So, yay.
Awesome.
That was great. We're so lucky to have you. And I always, whenever we do these presentations, I'm always like, that chunk could have been its own 2 hours. So maybe we have to just do that as well. There's so much to talk about in sustainability and waste, just specifically. So, okay. Leander and I are going to bring us home now. So, yeah, Wayne, again, so appreciative to work with you as a partner and to have you in this presentation as an expert. Just, that was the best. Okay. So before we get into downstream, for the last time, we're just going to revisit our little graphic here so we can tell where we are. Again, we talked about upstream. We just did a whole bunch of stuff about how to keep stuff in circulation so that they don't needlessly go out of the cycle. So now we're moving into that blue section, the downstream. So here's where we want products that have come to the end of their life of use back into that purple cycle as quickly as we possibly can so we don't lose that resource, and that resource can become an input into the system. So let's talk about what downstream looks like for these materials. By designing for circularity, we minimize the output or the downstream, but not everything will be perpetually reusable. So when a material is no longer in use, we want to capture it locally and as efficiently as possible, reducing any additional input from natural resources, that red section, and then get it back into the circular system, that big purple chunk. So in this section, we're gonna, again, look at our toolbox and see how we can use each of our 4 tools: infrastructure, legislation, product design, and consumer behavior at the downstream stage. Okay, so we're talking about technical systems. Remember, we're not quite talking about composting yet. We're almost there. But in this downstream phase for recycling, we need lots of infrastructure. So like we've been talking about this whole time, not only do we need infrastructure to recycle bottles, jars, cans, boxes, but we need to figure out how we can be recycling everything we produce when they can't be reused or fixed, which brings us to hard to recycle materials. So EcoCycle has the Center for Hard to Recycle Materials, or the CHARM, a hub where people can bring hard to recycle items from fire extinguishers to computer monitors year round. The CHARM was really the first of its kind, and now we're seeing CHARM-like facilities popping up all over the place, which is awesome. So EcoCycle, the City of Boulder, and visiting recyclers funded the CHARM, but there's someone missing in that economic responsibility for handling these materials correctly. Recovery should be funded by the producers rather than just making their buck at the sale and then casting the economic burden for handling those materials to the public and the recycler. So the CHARM, I did see some talk about this in the chat. The CHARM hosts and partners with Blue Star Recyclers, who is our in-house electronics recycler. Elsewhere in other programs, because we don't have universal standards or appropriate funding from producers, electronics are often shipped off to a developing country where they're picked apart by children, and discards might be sent to an open burning dump, and toxic waste leaches into local soils and waterways. So we really have to be careful to know exactly where our electronics are going. So not only does Blue Star have the highest environmental stewardship certification, but all of their parts stay in the US except for one type of screen. I have been told that goes to Spain specifically. That's the only one though. And they specifically employ adults with autism and other disabilities. So that is a win-win-win, and it should be free for consumers to recycle their electronics responsibly, and the producers should fund places like the CHARM and Blue Star. So you've heard me talk about a need for building recycling markets. So we're just going to talk about end market infrastructure for a minute here. So we had some change in markets, as many of you probably know and have probably reached out to us about, in the last few years because of the national sword from China, which is also called the green fence. So I did a whole 2.0 training just on this, like a whole 2-hour thing just on what happened with China. But the short story is that lots of American recyclers were relying on these Chinese markets to take their crap plastics and other recyclables, not just plastics, so they didn't invest in building infrastructure domestically. So through the national sword, China is no longer taking American recycling, which means that as a country, this is actually a great opportunity for us to build real solutions, like all the things we've mentioned here tonight. My analogy when I talk about the national sword is like, we've been like, our mom said, clean your room, and we like put all our stuff under the rug. And now the national sword lifted up the rug and we're like, oh, we have to do something real with all of this stuff that's under the rug. So it's a good opportunity. So our most recent bill that we successfully passed here in Colorado, along with a bunch of other great allies and organizations, is SB 2055, which is called Incentivize Developing Recycling End Markets. So the purpose of this bill is to gather stakeholders and create a center for end market development, similar to the other hubs I've been describing, like the hub for repair and reuse, the hub for product design, all of those. It will also help economically support recyclers and provide funding for education campaigns to the public. So this is an infrastructure success story quite recently. So good job to EcoCycle and Recycle Colorado and everyone who worked on that. Progress, that's an example of progress. You love to see it, don't you? Okay, so moving on to downstream legislation. Again, that's our other tool. So again, we're talking about materials that have come to the end of their useful lives. We can't do any of the other solutions that we've talked about anymore. So we have to recover them and then get them back in the system. And we're using our legislative tool again here. So a primary legislative tool here is product stewardship, where instead of the scenario we just described, where we, the consumers or local government or nonprofit recyclers, are left holding the bag, paying to do the right thing to responsibly handle the disposal of a product, manufacturers either take responsibility voluntarily or by legislative requirements for the full life cycle of their product. So if every producer took responsibility for the design, recovery, infrastructure, and markets for their product, anything could be potentially recyclable. So extended producer responsibility, or EPR, is a mandatory law since not many producers voluntarily take responsibility for their products. 33 states have enacted at least one EPR law, but they're almost all related to things like electronics, paint, and mercury products. So EPR in the US is still in its fledgling stage, to put it very kindly, compared to Europe, where this is a much more established concept and practice. So the federal level should also step up on EPR, but at the moment we are a far cry from seeing that happen. Bottle bills are also an example of EPR. A lot of us are familiar with that. Consumers, in a bottle bill, consumers are charged a small fee when they purchase a beverage, and then the fee is refunded when the container is returned, and it incentivizes returning that material. So manufacturers of beverage containers partner with retail stores, and other locations to recycle the containers. And according to the Container Recycling Institute, states with bottle bills recycled an average of 76% of their carbonated beverage containers, while states without those deposit laws recycled only 30% of those containers. That was in 2006. So we would love to have a bottle bill here in Colorado. It is tricky to enact a bottle bill after your recycling programs are already set up. So in places like Oregon, where they do have a really successful bottle bill, part of the reason is it's successful is because they set up their recycling system around their bottle bill from the get-go decades ago. So while new bottle bills haven't passed in quite some time, they are totally on the rise again in the US, and it's going to take some work to figure out how they can support existing infrastructure, but it's worth it because, as I just said, that 76% bottle bills have been proven to help recovery rates dramatically. We would love to see that. So on the local level, there are two ordinances that we always advocate for to help ensure that discards are captured and returned to the cycle. So first, it's called pay as you throw. It's a policy which means that you pay for the trash like any other utility. You pay more if you have more trash, like you pay more if you use more water or more energy or electricity or whatever it is. So you pay less if you have less trash. So this usually means that you get recycling for a flat fee, and your trash cost goes up or down depending on the size of your bin or frequency of pickup. So this just makes sense, again, like other utilities, because it incentivizes you to be less wasteful and recover more materials. A 3-cart system goes well with this, meaning that everyone automatically gets compost and recycling with their trash. You'll pay less for trash because you can divert waste to recycling and composting. And then Universal Zero Waste Ordinance, this little picture here is, it's also known as USWO. And we see that we see an example of that in the city of Boulder. So it just means that everywhere you see a trash can, you also see a compost and recycling with guidelines signage. So it is universally as easy to correctly recycle or compost something as it is to trash it. So not only do all single-use family homes, hopefully your home is not single-use. That would be, we would have a bigger issue. Wow, my brain is really wired to say single-use. Not only do all single-family homes have all 3 bins, but also every restaurant, store, multifamily complex, and public waste bin have all of those options. So lastly, on a state level, we have landfill bans and mandatory recycling laws. So landfill bans mean that you cannot landfill a certain item. Oh, sorry, Ari, that you're just one ahead. So usually electronics, batteries, tires, and things like that are banned from being landfilled. But it is crucial that you have infrastructure for accessible proper disposal. So in Colorado, we have a landfill ban on electronics, but again, you have to pay to recycle electronics responsibly, so that's not the most equitable solution, and the onus is on the consumer, not the producer. So if we don't have extended producer responsibility, so we should have both. The other thing about most landfill bans is that they don't really have good or effective enforcement a lot of the time. So especially on an individual basis, they're usually more geared toward industry dumping. A mandatory recycling law means that not only can you not put it in the landfill, but you also have to recycle it instead. So specifically, it's not just about the negative, it's like what you actually have to do with it. So ultimately, we could have this on all things that could be diverted from the landfill, not just hazardous waste and electronics, but corrugated cardboard, aluminum, steel, yard waste, and food waste, provided we also have the necessary infrastructure for everyone to be able to do the right sustainable thing with those materials. Okay, which leads us to the downstream section for us as consumers. So really the downstream part for consumer behavior is recycling, which I am assuming you already do to the extent that you can. So it's not about just curbside recycling, business recycling, but also hard to recycle materials. Spreading the word about the importance of all of this is also a key action for individuals like you. Being an informed, active recycler is also so helpful to us, and being a resource for other consumers and recyclers. So that's what being an eco-leader is all about. If you're not already an eco-leader, I will send that link again in the follow-up email, and I would love to train you to be one of these ambassadors spreading the word. Okay, so we're finally going to get into organics. We have so much information that obviously we're not going to start questions at 7 because it is 7:02 currently, I'm noticing. So we will leave as much time as we can for questions. If Zoom lets us stick around a little bit more, we can do that. But also don't worry, because we can record all the questions and the chat, and then I will send a whole email where I can answer all of the questions anyway. So don't fret. Okay, so here, this is the graphic on the left that I showed at the beginning when we first introduced what circular economy is as a broader concept. So now we've covered the technical cycle, which is over here on the right. So all the stuff we talked about and the systems we build using those 3 stages was the technical cycle, so those man-made products. So now we're moving over to the left to the biological systems. So we need both pieces to make our circular economy model. So, sorry, next slide, Ari, please. So this is a much shorter section of the presentation because the system is naturally perfectly cyclical. So we don't have to do all of this stuff. We're talking about the biological systems, meaning the resources and processes already provided to us by nature. So we have a perfect circular economy already built in nature, and we short-circuited it and we made it linear. So we broke it and we just have to let it do its thing. So modern civilization has disrupted the natural organic cycle and replaced it with this linear economy model, which again, take, make, waste. So organics are supposed to fertilize our soil to grow more food. Leander will talk about all of this in great detail. But instead, we stripped our soils of nutrients through practices like monocropping and pesticides and herbicides and just flooding it with NPK. Our food is therefore less nutritious. And we created waste by sending our organics to the landfill where they don't break down. So organics are great at breaking down naturally, but they need air to do that. Landfills are designed to be airtight, so when organics go to the landfill, they undergo anaerobic decomposition, which means they break down super slowly, but also they're cranking out methane in the meantime, which is a powerhouse greenhouse gas, which is heating up our climate. So not what we want. This is the linear track we're currently on, and all we have to do, again, is just bend that line into a circle and just let nature do her thing. We don't have to build all these things like we've been talking about for the last hour and a half. So if we compost instead of landfill or organic materials, we turn the problem into a solution really quickly. If we take the organics out of the landfill and put them in the compost instead, landfills stop emitting methane because organics are the thing emitting methane in the landfills, and all landfills, any given landfill is about half full of organics or more. Organics can then decompose how they're supposed to in the compost. Compost returns nutrients to the soils, we grow nutritious local food, and then compost applied to the soils draws down carbon from the atmosphere and stores it safely in the soil. So suddenly this huge problem we created with the linear system becomes a huge climate solution with the circular system. So pulling from the same toolbox here, we can first look at how infrastructure plays a role in fixing this organics linear model. When we talk about infrastructure, we need to build local universal compost access. So compost should be something done on a local scale, as Leander will talk about. But when we localize compost, we not only get people involved back in composting, but they compost it right, because when they get the compost back, they're invested in its quality and they understand the process. So we should be keeping organics local so that they can then grow local, nutritional, accessible food. And organics are heavy, so we don't want to be shipping them all the way to a different facility anyway, if we care about things like emissions and transportation. Like I said earlier in the presentation, we're coming up with all of these compostable alternatives to wastes, like a compostable cup. Sorry, something just popped right over my notes. But if all of those compostable cups and alternatives are still going to the landfill rather than the compost, again, they're not going to break down like we want them to, and then they'll just be contributing to the problem rather than the solution in the downstream. So now legislation. Let's see. So our next tool, again, for this biological system, we already talked about all of these concepts, but we're just going to apply them to organics instead of the technological systems we talked about earlier. So landfill bans, again, we just talked about. Instead of talking about electronics, we're going to talk about organics. So we could ban the dumping of compostable materials into the landfill. And like we just said, it's important to provide universal access to the correct way to recover these materials. So therefore we can pass laws like we just saw with the Universal Zero Waste Ordinance, where there's a compost everywhere you see a trash. We can also do things like make a statewide organics management plan, which would be passed as a bill. So this is something that we're currently working on in the state of Colorado. So stay tuned about that. And we are down to product design. So lots of companies, when making products or packaging and labeling them, are now opting for using words on their label like compostable, plant-based, biodegradable, etc., because those buzzwords are really big right now. These terms don't really mean anything if they don't come with certification. So first of all, these products need to be BPI certified compostable. That is the certification for compostability. And lots of them that say biodegradable are just a petroleum-based plastic, maybe with a little bit of plant material in there, that are designed to break down into microplastics even quicker than they would otherwise, which is a negative thing because then we have plastics in our water and our soils and our bodies quicker than we would otherwise. But then second of all, make sure, again, you have the infrastructure. If you're going to be making compostable products, we need a compost to put them in. Manufacturers need to be aware and involved with those next steps of creating the infrastructure to close the whole loop on their product. And lastly, for me, as an individual, this is like our individual level, we can get involved with carbon farming. So I said in the slide before last that when we apply compost to soils, it can sequester carbon from the atmosphere, and that's called carbon farming. It was actually tested originally in the Marin County Carbon Farming Project on an agricultural site out in California, where they applied compost to agricultural fields, leaving a control, and then measured how much carbon was sequestered into those soils, among other things. So a study of that sort has never been done on non-agricultural lands like urban backyards and landscapes, parks, stuff like that. So here at EcoCycle, that's what we decided to do because no one else was doing it. So we started the Community Carbon Farming Campaign, in which 250 people across Boulder County applied soil amendments. There were 5, but compost was one of them, onto a 10 by 10 plot in their yards, and then they left a control untreated. And then as a community, we're gonna figure out how much carbon we're drawing down. It's a 3-year study, so we're not done yet, but it's been a great way to get involved in a hands-on climate community-based solution. And we hope that we can export this model and these solutions as far as wide as possible. And this year, we also launched the Observational Carbon Farming Project, which is our first attempt at that exportation. So we had 300 people this year apply compost on their own yards and follow a video series that we made to train them. And then we did our own soil test through this app called Land PKS. And then anyone can be involved with that project. You still can if you want, so I'll send that information out. And okay, that was, I've talked so much tonight, I know. So this leads me to introduce our other wonderful speaker, Leandra from Backyard Farm. We met because of our shared interest in circular economy. And I love how her efforts are all about closing the loop on organics with her organization called Backyard Farm. So she's all about, as she, in her own words, she's all about making a local system that can go farm to table, table to farm, as it should be. So Leandra is going to take us home in explaining how to build a circular economy in our biological systems. And her piece will be the last chunk of content that we'll cover before we do questions. So I will pass it over to you now, Leandra. I will unmute you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Rosie. I appreciate you. And thank you, Wayne. So yeah, here we have our first slide. And organic circular economy is another way of saying that a vast network of complex, wonderful, and natural processes are perfectly taking place in our environment that is changing all the time. But why do we care about that? So we can start with humankind's most fundamental benefit of organic circular economy, and that's nutrients. So society's main takeaway from nature, aside from habitat, is nutrients. And therefore, where do nutrients come from exactly? Just give me 1 second. When we think of nutrients, we think of food. One of the 3 major ways humans intake essential minerals, vitamins, proteins, carbs, and lipids. So where does food come from? No matter if we choose to eat meat or a plant-based diet, everything begins with plants. And when plants are specifically grown for food, they're called crops. A lot of this seems like it would be stuff that we already know, but a lot of us can be disconnected from the beginnings of our food, and so we're just bringing that back here. Like many plants, crops live in soil, and as any living thing, they depend on their habitat and their environment to provide them with everything they need to thrive. So for plants, that's nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, 3 very specific things. When crops thrive, the roots are strong and capable of absorbing those vital nutrients, thus being the only state in which a food crop can actually grow nutrient-rich produce. So when we have strong roots, we have strong produce, and when we have strong soil, we have strong roots. So we know that we absorb nutrients from our food, and our food absorbs nutrients from the soil, but where does the soil get its nutrients from? Life begins with decomposition. When organic matter dies and falls to the ground, microorganisms rapidly begin to colonize and eat the carbon-containing matter, breaking it down into its simplest form. Digestion, that's what happens there. This transformed matter is called humus, rich in nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, those 3 very specific nutrients that we talked about before. An ideal amendment and fertilizer is what that is, and when it's integrated back into the soil, it makes everything come back together again. And so when gardeners and farmers facilitate this process by collecting the organic matter in heaps and providing ideal conditions for that breakdown process, it's called composting. It is 100% fair to compare this process to alchemy, of which the goal is to transform matter into gold. And we would compare that to compost, decomposed matter, because everyone needs food and everyone needs nutrient-rich food. And that's how we get that. So if you're an average American consumer, you may be familiar with a few of our country's staple crops. Soybeans, wheat, corn, and rice being at the top of the list. However, the problem is not what we're growing, it is how we're growing it. Annuals by nature have short life cycles of one season. Therefore, in the US, it takes a lot of energy to plant, maintain, harvest, and till an entire corn crop, for example, every season. Intensive farming exists to produce the most bounty in the shortest amount of time, and consequently, that requires more work taking shape in a lot of machinery, a lot of labor used to till massive plots of land. The entire decomposition process has been short-circuited here for the sake of the annual, immediately stripping the soil of vital nutrients. And if you take this practice and repeat it over the course of a few hundred years, the outcome is devastating to the condition of the soil. And you can see that in the picture that I included on the slide here. That is what that does. So the energy demand of an annual crop does not stop there. Genetically modified staple crops are synthesized in labs to accomplish resistance to certain conditions and persist without vital nutrients, negating the need to revitalize eroded soil and encouraging the production of nutrient-empty crops that are often modified to be enlarged to appeal to the consumer. Along with genetically modified seeds comes the excessive use of herbicides and pesticides, which are really just concentrated chemicals. Again, the issue is not these methods. In fact, if used properly, these methods could be a huge game changer for world hunger. However, we have been in a very codependent relationship with all of these quick fixes, and just like any toxic relationship, tremendous harm can be done. We have mutated the entomological and herbaceous species that we've attempted to control, making them stronger, perpetuating the illusion that we need stronger chemicals, and in the meanwhile, we're driving out invaluable pollinators in the process. Currently, majority of the imbalance comes directly from concentrated animal feeding operations, otherwise known as CAFOs or factory farms. The quantity over quality mentality is most apparent here. And because the numbers of animals that can be held in one warehouse keeps growing, so does the need to grow more food and feed for those animals. So we clear more forest, we grow more genetically modified corn, and end up spending more precious resources and energy feeding the livestock of America than the society. By default, humans will get only 8% of that nutritional value. Along with these intensive methods comes intense amounts of discarded materials also that are a struggle to manage properly, severely contaminating every facet of the Earth's natural systems, as Rosie was talking about. So we say this is getting back to basics because it was not that long ago that Native American people received an abundance of nutrients from the natural diet that they were accustomed to. Today, it is a chronic struggle for the average American to get their daily nutrient intake from a food chain that's caving in on itself. And many rely on supplements because of that. The great news is that we have recognized early on that nature is not linear, and major movements have been organized to bring awareness to the beauty of working with nature's cycles rather than short-circuiting them. The even greater news is that as average American consumers, or consumers in general, there are many practical solutions we can all adopt, integrate, and strongly benefit from in our everyday routines, furthering the progress others have already made before us. For first-timers, composting begins with food scrap collection. For some, this can seem difficult to achieve only because what do you do with the food crops or food scraps? You could wiki how backyard composting, but there are also many resources that provide a few more options. It is possible that your county offers that service. There are also independent companies like Compost Queen in Northern Colorado and organizations like EcoCycle who gladly fill that gap if municipal facilities and infrastructure are not available. Next to food scrap collection, for composting is shopping local. Locality is key for positive impact and offers exponential benefits, not only to the consumer, but the entire consumer's community. For instance, choosing to purchase fresh meat that is raised in your county lines not only negates the need for CAFOs, but secures your small local farm sovereignty and the consumer's sovereignty, which is great for the local economy and secures that's the sovereignty of the economy as well. Shopping at your nearby farmer's market accomplishes the same idea and also provides the simple pleasure of knowing who grows your food and how they grow it, because that's the beauty of gathering your food locally. You know exactly where it comes from. We can appreciate the process that it took for the agriculturists of the community to steward the land to provide us the true and legitimate sustenance that is. And it may even be that you decide to get as local as possible and start growing produce in your own backyard. So knowing now that the short circuit of intensive farming leads to purchasing nutrient empty food, will you continue to compromise the quality of your nourishment? Sometimes we get so caught up in the hustle of work and home life that we forget we are a part of a bigger picture. And in that bigger picture, there are many resources at our disposal to get us back on track. ColoradoFarmersMarkets.org is just one example of where you can go to find farmers markets near you, and Colorado does not have a shortage of them. Lucky us. Another great starting point is understanding what ecological landscaping is. Take your traditional yard care and eliminate the harmful weed mats, pesticides, fertilizers. Your local landscape company has a great opportunity to make positive impact on the environment, making sure to facilitate circular economy as direct workers of the land. It makes sense that the word land is in landscapers, and I just want to remind everybody of that. So it makes sense that making carbon farming and landscape sequestering one of the most practical ways to participate in organic circular economy for any family or business. It comes down to choosing who you decide to work on your land as a landowner, business owner, or what have you. Backyard Farm of Northern Colorado is one of those companies, and as we've evolved into a proud zero waste company, what we've come to realize and value most is that education is primary, and making progressive and elevated choices, such as how we interact with the human food chain, how we care for our land, and if we will reclaim a symbiotic relationship with nature again. And I can go to my final slide, which is a huge thank you to everybody who participated in this webinar today, and to EcoCycle for inviting us to speak and share these slides. I'm really happy that everybody will be able to have these so you can reference them again and again and again, as many times as you need to remind yourself about all the wonderful things that we talked about. So thank you, Rosie. Thank you, Wayne. And thank you, Ari.
Yay, that was awesome, Leandra. Thank you so much. Amazing. Okay. So obviously we're really running out of time. I think that we actually, between Ari and I and our coworker Marty as well, the deputy director, we've been answering questions as we go, both in the chat box and in the Q&A. So I think it is important though to wrap up with some deliverables and what you can do, some actionable items to go forward so that you can take this momentum and excitement and do something about it. So I ran out of light, as you can see, so I literally have my flashlight on my face right now. Okay, so we gave you a lot of information here tonight, and I hope that at least some of it resonated with you and sparked interest and excitement for future actions, or at least future research. There's a lot to mull over here. So I will send out all of these slides plus the recording, so you can totally go back and mull things over even more, plus all of the resources that we've talked about here tonight. It really was so much stuff. So we've all been programmed to think within this linear cycle, this linear system, because that is where we live. And we get bogged down and frustrated when our efforts in one area don't seem to be enough, like that, where it's like squiggles and then it still goes to the trash can in that recycling economy. So you can see that in the in this turning wheel of circularity, there are all these cogs that have to be working together to keep the materials in the cycle. So if we're all killing ourselves to recycle, but none of the other cogs are turning, we're always going to be frustrated. So we need to keep doing what we're doing, plus look at all these other pieces and look at it as a larger system. So you've learned a lot about legislative and infrastructural efforts, and I guarantee there is something going on around you wherever you are on this scale that you can help with. So we're about to have a virtual plastics lobby day at the Colorado Capitol, for example, which I'll send information about. Stay informed about the many different state laws we're introducing and make your voice heard in support of them. On a local level, think about which of the policies we've mentioned have already been implemented in your city and see if anyone is working on the rest. And I bet that they are. As a consumer, you can let your voice be heard to the companies that you buy from about their packaging, their product, or their efforts or lack thereof. This can also be positive impact, like Wayne was saying, or positive feedback, like Wayne was saying. Vote with your dollar, buy from companies that are doing the right thing, avoid plastics as much as you can, especially 3, 6, and 7. Compost and recycle, including those hard to recycle materials. Get creative when you're done with an item and think of everything you can do with it before you chuck it, and check your EcoCycle A to Z app, which I will send out. Put compost in your yards and gardens to carbon farm, whether you officially join our campaign or not. Repair, spread the word about the many options Wayne presented us with. Set up a small sharing economy in your own neighborhood. All the things Leandra said, buy local foods, local products, carbon farm, know who's working on your land and what you're putting in your body. Yeah, I want to end on a super positive note here. So I know I've, again, presented you with so much to think about, and there is so much work to be done because we can see that we're still linear. We know that. But we shouldn't feel hopeless or helpless because look at all the things we can do. There is literally no shortage of things that we can do. We can only go up from here if we get to work. So this is just the beginning. We still haven't even talked about the entire circular economy vision, which remember includes things like sustainable travel and green spaces and health. So I'll leave you with this quote that I look at probably 10 times a day while I'm working, which is, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. So that was said by Margaret Mead. So to wrap up, again, I will send such a meaty follow-up email, chock full with all the resources I've been mentioning throughout the night, which will include these slides, the recording, webinar, all of it. Take a look, see what interests you, and please don't hesitate to reply to me directly with questions, ideas, or if you want to get involved, I'll also include Leandra and Wayne's contact info so you can reach out to them as well. And so again, we have 4 minutes for questions, but I think we have answered a lot of them here. A lot of the questions have been recorded, as many as we can, and so we will, I will, in my follow-up email, write out all the answers, including the questions, and send them out. So we have that too, because I didn't want to cut any of our content because it was all so good. Someone said, can I make the meaty email vegetarian? It will be vegetarian. It will be vegan in fact. Okay. I think
I can, do you want me to stop share so that we can see everybody, the panelists' face?
sure.
Okay, we'll see what happens when I,
About 3 minutes.
whoa, look at that.
I think a lot of the Q&A questions are kind of like comment, like we replied to a lot of them and
Yeah, we did.
they're more commenty.
There's more, yeah, there's more commenty things than questions that I can see, at least.
The state this is the state rate on recycling is only 17%. What is it currently for Boulder? We have Sandy and Ellen, I think, still here who work there, but it is around 50% if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, I think that was from the, yeah, just over 50% was the most recent reporting from the past year. Yeah.
We could all be doing that. We did it, answered it live.
Oh.
Thank you, Sandy. She said 50%. It's City of Boulder. Done, okay. I love all of the comments that have been going on this whole time. You guys have just been chatting with me.
Wayne and Leandra should get unmuted, and I can't do it because I'm the
guys. I'm so sorry.
You're just in charge.
So,
Thanks.
in response to a question that was answered about what happens when a broken item goes to Goodwill, do they throw it away or do they have to recycle it? I don't know the answer, but if anybody has Goodwill or ARC or whatever contacts, it'd be great to ask them, what do they do with the stuff that they deem unfit to go on the shelves? And how could we get involved in repairing those things? Because maybe there's some volunteers that would like to do that. I know one thing we've talked about when we've talked about, you know, that the on-site, you know, sort of permanent workshop repair facility at EcoCycle. We'd love to get volunteers to go through the stream and fix some stuff and get it out there to people who need it. Like, for example, right now, a lot of us are donating money to community food share because people are in trouble, right? Chances are, if you need some free bread, you might need a free toaster oven to go with it. And let's get that toaster oven to them, right? So it's easily safe to repair things that don't make it to the shelves of Goodwill and other places where people donate with good intentions, right? They don't even know it's worked, but maybe we could do that. So great to work with those guys, and great to have Goodwill, which, by the way, is a for-profit company, could take some of their profits to subsidize the work to repair these things and really create a positive image of what they're doing. So then they, that'd be great. So if anybody has contacts, all ears for a new project.
Love that idea. That's awesome. If they had a whole kind of workshop in the back that they could just repair many things, probably, even if it was just to replace small, minuscule things, probably save so many things from being tossed out.
Yeah. I think that I've said this to Wayne and Leandra, but what I love about both of their messages and both of their organizations and models is that it's local and you can do it anywhere. That's the whole point, is that they're taking advantage of their resources around them and keeping them in circularity as long as they can, and making it accessible for everyone, for everyone to be able to access that solution. Hey Wayne, I'm trying to unmute. There you go.
No, it's fine. No, I forgot if I was going to say something. I just wanted to press the button. Yeah, I do agree with that. The scalability of what we're working on is there. And again, my sort of interesting experience with the virtual fix-it clinics is, when a woman in Jakarta has repair advice for a guy about his French 220 volt waffle iron in Paris, it's like, oh my gosh, this is an interesting world, right? We have the same dumb appliances all over the place, and they break in exactly the same ways, and we all have the abilities to help each other out. Why haven't we been doing that, right? Why don't we do it as much? It's so possible. So a lot of people come away from all of our events, even if it's a zero waste event, right? And you tell someone, oh, well, that's actually compostable. Oh, really? It's a paper plate. Yes. So they walk away with that, and we hope that that's a life change. I know my own kids grew up in Boulder, and there was always a recycling and a compost bin in our house, right? Always. So they've never imagined that a soda can, a beer can more likely, goes in the trash. It's just never been a concept for them. Or a vegetable peel gets thrown away. Of course it gets composted. And that had a big effect. My oldest son is a PhD in environmental science. So that's how that goes.
Awesome.
So the impact of the work of these volunteers that are represented here are awesome, right? You gotta remember that. You don't know it, right? It's layers and layers and layers away about what changes happen.
And
waste. Go ahead. I was just gonna say, it's really quick. I was just gonna say to Wayne, waste has been a systematic progression, and so zero waste also has to be a systematic progression as well. So we're turning the system in on itself just by making the same decisions that are kind of the opposite and way more beneficial to all of our lives and our community.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Yeah. I was going
Thank you.
in response to the volunteers that, this came up in the chat. Wayne, I don't know if you saw it, but somebody was saying, like, not only are we reducing input and reducing output, but also we're learning lifelong skills, and it's invaluable to have that power within yourself. And yeah, that's great. And I wanted to say that Sandy in the chat, Sandy Briggs with the City of Boulder, said, Ellen, who also works at the City of Boulder, and I work with a thrift store working group through the Boulder Chamber, and we'll bring up this excellent idea about Goodwill. Great. Yes. Boulder Time Bank. Very cool. No.
Awesome.
You guys have, Leandra and Wayne, I feel like you both are just are wells of knowledge, and I I know I promised like some panel time and we just didn't get it because we all had so much to say. But if you have any, like, do either of you have any parting wisdom that you want to share beyond like kind of your conclusion slides? I just wanted to give you some time to talk if you wanted it.
I'll let Wayne go first.
Oh, I was hoping Leandra was going to tell me something I should be doing in my garden that I'm not doing, especially in the winter. All right, so I love composting. It goes to my bin. I could compost in the backyard, but that'd be another thing for me to do. Is there sort of a simple way I can turn some of my really highly valuable compost into something I can use for my own tomato, vegetable, flower gardens?
Sure. So you say, so you don't want to compost in your backyard, or
Well, I
you
don't
do?
want to do like a grand scale thing with a giant, container thingy to have to go babysit. It's another thing. But if I could have a little bit of stuff, because honestly, I buy some Miracle Grow rose food, right? Because it makes pretty roses. But could I be doing something simpler? Because as we talked about earlier, when I put something in my biodegradable bio bags and put them in my compost bin, and a big diesel fume truck comes and picks them up and carries them someplace, and then the compost goes someplace else, my composting has triggered the use of diesel fuel, right? And I'd really rather
Right.
not do that.
So that, yes, common conundrum in the industry for sure, and in organic circular economy. And that I love that because it reminds me of the organic sphere, the biosphere, and then the industrial sphere, and how those really come together. Really, they're the same exact thing, and they just are dying at very slow, decomposing at very different rates. So one way to supplement that rate for your backyard is vermicomposting, and that's incorporating worms into the bin. So you want to start off with a lot of brown material, dead leaves, soil, dirt, whatever you can find, topsoil with the leaves. Get a bucket of worms from your local gardening store, order them online, add them in there, and then you just start adding your green organic matter, which is going to be your food scraps. So you just throw it directly from your kitchen into your bin, and you can get any size of bin and do as big of a vermicompost as you want to. They're going to eat the whatever material you put in there, and it'll keep growing. So you can control that, and you just want to make sure that there's air holes at the top. So it's very simple.
So I'm thinking that the stuff that's kitchen waste that goes in the bio bag is probably all very, very compostable, whereas the yard waste pieces
You would, right? You would want to partner. Yeah, you'd want to partner with EcoCycle, who gets their big stuff to A1 Organics, where it then can be reintroduced back into your garden if you want to purchase compost through them. That's why Compost Queen in Northern Colorado is so amazing, and a pioneer. She's a pioneer woman in that industry because she does food scrap collection for the community at very affordable rates on a weekly basis. And she does the processing in her own facility that they've created, and then redistributes the compost back to everybody, all of her members, in the spring. So that's what I was talking about with those gaps that are being filled by the creative and people sharing their space. She's sharing her land to compost other people's food scraps who may not have the time or the space to do that and still get it back into their gardens.
I mean, it'd be great if my homeowners association could get its act together and say, folks, let's have a community compost in our shared land. Let's have a community garden. If you don't want to garden it, you don't have to, but it's a lot better for us to locally compost, right?
Well, that is what Backyard Farm does. We do create campaigns for HOAs. I am very familiar with HOAs, and I make them immediately with all of our clients and members who are in an HOA. I get HOA information. I make sure they know who I am, because a lot of the time you have to ask for permission to plant a tree or whatever. And I mean, these are just, we're all people making these decisions. So as a professional, I approach them and build these relationships and work with them instead of this idea of, oh, the HOA is against me. They really just, they just want communication. And if the whole neighborhood got together and signed something that said, we want Backyard Farm, or we want to do it ourselves and build a community garden and create this composting and this culture in our HOA, they wouldn't turn you down if there was multiple people who were backing you up.
All right, good ideas, thanks.
Yeah.
I do want to throw in that that yes, we are lucky to partner with A1 Organics. That is where our waste goes right now, Wayne, when you put it in your bin and it gets hauled away. And as we talked about, again, like the more local, the better for sure. And in that vein, so yeah, if you can do it as locally as your neighborhood, awesome. And in that vein, we are working very hard and have been for a while to create a Boulder County facility that could take things that might not break down in your backyard. So like the compostable cups and the clamshells and the avocado pits and the meats and bones and all of that stuff. So I don't think I did mention that localizing effort is underway, but just in tandem with what Leandra just said.
Yeah, and they're popping up everywhere, right? If you have the land and the space and you're passionate about composting, it's totally legal and free to start doing it for people in the backyard. So
it strikes me as ironic if we could include someone from, I don't know, 150 years ago in America who was, you know, an early farmer, a homesteader or whatever. They'd say, how many years has it taken you to figure out what we did a long time ago? You fix your own garden implements, you fix your own tractors, and you take care of your food waste instead of throwing it in a pit somewhere? Duh. You know, a lot of this is back to the future, right?
The milkman model.
Yeah.
We have everything we need. We have everything we need. And the roses example was a great example, Wayne, because you want those beautiful roses and we all want the end goal. But if we get we're ahead of the curve, like now is a great time to start a compost pile or to start, you know, collecting your food scraps for somebody to create it into compost for you to fertilize that next spring. That way you don't have to go out and buy the packaged amendments at the very last minute, because your yard already has everything that it needs to produce those beautiful flowers. It's just a matter of the actual stewardship and facilitation of that, which sometimes you just need a little help with. So,
well, you have to convince people who perhaps their self-esteem is entirely around perhaps more superficial things like, you know, what color is their Subaru, or you know, what kind of clothes they have, and not are they part of a circular economy, right? It's hard to brag about that, right? It's not what we value, and that's a cultural shift that I hope we can do in a positive way as opposed in a negative, desperate, last ditch effort, right?
yeah.
But I remember, you know, years ago we started a neighborhood eco pass. It's kind of related. And, you know, we're knocking on doors and making phone calls, say, hey, you know, we want to do the eco pass and it's going to cost X dollars. Everybody kicks in. And one of my neighbors told me, oh, we have 5 cars. We don't need a bus pass. Okay. This is a, you know, a cultural switch here, right? No, I didn't say that you shouldn't have cars. It's just, it wasn't like we have the bus pass so we have transportation. It's a different, better way of doing things, right? And so that's a cultural shift that we're not quite there yet. When we say that Colorado is only 17%, it's so clear we don't have the culture throughout, right? So I don't know, maybe there needs to be a major motion picture or a binge watchable TV series or a rap artist or a hip hop that talks about this as being a very human cultural change that you really want to be part of. I don't know. People maybe follow their idols, right? It's hard to say, right?
Well, the thing that I find in my generation specifically is that we are all very passionate about the environment and the future of our planet, but a lot of us are miseducated on how to get there, and that has a lot to do with the greenwashing culture of media and marketing. And it's wonderful that our generation and people of our generation as eco leaders can recognize that and come together and spread the word and say, yeah, you're not crazy. This doesn't make any sense. We all realize it doesn't make any sense. We just don't know where to start. And a few of us do. So as long as we can just grab each other by the hand and pull each other along, I think it's those aha moments. And I see that a lot when I'm working with new clients. A lot of the time they find us and they think we're, you know, like we talked about, a bougie organic landscaping company. And we are definitely an organic landscaping company because we focus on the organics, not because we're USDA certified or have marketing labels. It's because we wholeheartedly operate off of biodiversity and the organics. And when they have these aha moments like, oh, I didn't realize I can just spread sunflower seeds and not have to worry about these weeds instead, but that would be much more beautiful. And yeah, yes, we want that beauty, and there are easy ways to get it. It's just, how do we un-greenwash ourselves? And it's by participating in stuff like this, I think, and just continuing to educate ourselves and strive for more answers.
Yeah, again, well said. I think, I mean, I feel that in our generation, but I also, in doing outreach around this every day of my life, I also see that in every single generation. I think the oldest generation right now is, they were taught to do this from the beginning, because in war times, in the Great Depression, you know, you have to save everything, and that makes sense to them. And then, you know, the boomers want a better generation for their children, and then millennials and Gen Z are really, yeah, we're scared for our futures, and we are making it more culturally appropriate, but it's so overwhelming, as you said, because of greenwashing and because of the whole side that I had about how, you know, it's perceived to be our fault. It's so depressing and hard to know what to do. So I think all of the generations, yeah, like you said, all joining hands, we are all, enough of us are worried about it that we don't need to convince the people that aren't. And yeah,
exactly. It's just about, at this point, organizing and making better decisions every single day.
I
includes,
hesitate to bring it up, but a very powerful, important thing we do is vote.
Yes.
Because the cultural shift, for better or worse,
well, that's
does come
legislation.
from the top down, right? I mean, the fact that the re-implementation of the Rose Garden removed trees is absolutely disturbing to me, right? So when Reagan moved in, he took off solar panels from the roof. No, I think Bush took off the solar panels, right? Because it was a symbol he didn't want to share. So, wow. Not that that's what, you know, the White House is not in charge of our national culture, but to lead by example, to say, hey, let's take care of the world we live in. These are long-term things to do, as well as short-term S&P 500 numbers, right? Long-term big bets. And we need leadership that has that. And we need it throughout the freaking world to say, guys, you know, you are a big, complicated organism, and your human activities are changing the planet. If you don't understand that by now, you got to, right? And that's important. And I wonder if, you know, I wonder if we'll get enough vote turnout to really make the difference, because that's the important thing. There are some people that may be just disenfranchised, and that's very, very difficult. So, yeah. And, you know, of course, what I mean is vote for Trump because he's the recycling dude. No. No. There's only one choice. There's only one choice. Yep. Even in Colorado, it's difficult. We don't have the candidates that really fully 100% are consistent with our mission here. So, no. It's pretty straightforward, right? I don't know how you could walk away from this conversation not who to vote for if you're voting for the planet. Very easy.
Well, there's a lot of different levels, you know, to people's understandings and participation in the community. And as we said before, the systematic, just the system in general of what it's been since the 60s has been a take, inflation. And what is happening is now we're raising all these whole new generations on a much more holistic based, down to earth based, looking forward based type of way. And so we're seeing a phase out and a phase in, and how people respond in between those on all different levels are each important, no matter whether it's voting, which could be considered at the top of the participation to some people and maybe not to other people, but to other people maybe actually food scrap collection is the most important thing to start working on, and gardening, because that's what they can do in their immediate environment for their community. So there's so many different levels on how to participate and make change, and whichever way individuals decide, there's no wrong or right way. The only wrong way is to not participate at all. So
Yeah.
So zero pressure, right?
All right.
I like the comments. Thank you. That's perfect. Thanks, Marty, for clearing that up. And thanks for that link for For Joe, awesome. Not to get too philosophical about this, what I found in the delightful volunteer work with EcoCycle and its associated organizations, I find people that are very conscious of the individual versus the community and the short term versus the long term. And we're talking about keeping things out of the landfill and growing a garden and dealing with our compost and our waste. It's about our care for the community over the long term, not about my profits this quarter. And it's tough. It's tough, right? Because the culture is really more about the latter. But I found the most refreshing thing is that the people who want to volunteer and get involved and enthusiastic like that are refreshingly, excitingly interested in those community long-term things. And it's fulfilling. And for me as a retired dude who used to work for corporate America, which definitely was about quarterly results, it's been a wonderful transition to get involved.
Great. Okay. Well, on that note, we will have to wrap it up. Again, can't thank you enough, Wayne and Leandra, both amazing, and I will include your contact info in our follow-up email, so you can reach out to them.
Right back at you, except I won't have a follow-up email, but
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Rosie.
And for those guys who stuck, our last 26 participants, thank you for sticking there. It's nice to have even a textual conversation with you. Looking forward to when we get together in person and enjoy a beverage and talk about this stuff, because I'm totally energized by all these amazing eco volunteers, eco leaders.
Yeah.
All right.
All of you guys are awesome. Go have some dinner and drink some water and go to bed. And I will send that follow-up email as soon as I can. And I will talk to you all next time. Big thanks to everyone who came and was involved. And you're all amazing.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, guys.